We are happy you found your way to our introductory course to human rights, and it's great you are joining us on our journey for the promotion of all human rights for all. You don't need any prior knowledge of human rights to take this course. We aim to provide you with an understanding of the key concepts and to empower you to promote human rights. Throughout this course, you will gain the knowledge and skills you need in order to take action for human rights, to promote and claim them for yourself and others. You will understand what they are, their key principles, and the key actors, including your own role in defending or raising awareness. You're going to listen to some activists and real situations and provide you with tips, including to assess your personal risk. You will be asked to do some activities, either by writing or by recording your response in an audio file that you can keep to yourself. When you listen to this sound, it means that a new section is starting, while this sound indicates a question. We will give you some seconds to reflect on questions, so don't worry if you notice some silence after each question. This course is made up of 3 sections, each approximately 24 minutes, and at the end of each, you will find a final quiz which will help you reflect on the key takeaways. The course begins with the basics and becomes more in-depth and increases in difficulty as the course progresses. The first section is about what human rights are and how you can promote them. In the second section, you will learn ways of speaking up for them and the role of institutions. The third section focuses on challenges and risks when dealing with human rights. At the end of the course, you will come away with an increased awareness of the human rights that you hold and ways to defend them. What inspires you to stand up for human rights? Let's hear from Maria Munir, an award-winning LGBTI activist, Guadalupe Marrego, head of the Global Human Rights Defenders Program at Amnesty International, and Salil Shetty, a long-term activist and Amnesty Secretary General from 2010 to 2018.
I think there's no one inspiration that really comes to mind. I think for me, it's empowering to be part of a community of human rights defenders. I think no one can really work in isolation. And for me, especially when, I'm feeling down or feeling like I need a jolt in the right direction, it's really inspiring to be able to see what other people have achieved. Whether it's in my own field or not, I like to feel part of a community because I think we're stronger that way. But obviously, my friends see a brighter future for me, and I think that's really important. I think when you're doing human rights work, it can be very pessimistic because you're fighting against a lot of forces and a lot of institutions and power structures which are really hard to unpack. So I think it's important to be in a positive environment. I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear that I don't find myself inspiring at all because I'm just an ordinary person doing things that to some feel extraordinary, but I think everyone can have an impact in their own small way, and for me it just happens to be in a public atmosphere.
I tell you what inspires me: victims of human rights violations, victims of injustice, and their relatives or their loved ones fighting to get a remedy for that injustice. And I've met so many of those people, mainly in Latin America, but also around the world, who, after having suffered a grave human rights violation, they are really knocking from door to door in parliament with lawyers, with local human rights defenders, to fight for their son or their daughter to be released from prison because they've been falsely charged, or to have, medical attention because they've been tortured and get the perpetrator put in jail. Those are the people that actually inspire me.
In my case, I think I really had no option but to stand up for human rights because I was growing up in India at a time when we had a political emergency declared by the then Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi. And it's the only time in India's history when the civil and political rights were suspended in the country. So, and people were arrested, in mass numbers. The press was muzzled. Civil society was crushed. So I grew up at a moment like that. So, and a lot of my friends, people I knew, were under attack from the regime. So I think I had really no choice, and so I've never looked back since.
Welcome to the first activity for this course. Throughout this course, you will have the opportunity to engage in personal reflection about how human rights relate to you and how you can stand up for them. Now, take a pen and paper to start some activities, or you could even record your response in an audio file that you can keep to yourself. Let's start with your personal reflection on the experiences that you've just heard. 1. What were common themes or ideas that inspired people to stand up for human rights? Which aspect of their stories resonated with you the most? 2. What inspires you to stand up for human rights and against injustice? 3. Can you assess the status of your own human rights and if you have suffered any violation? So, let's now consider what human rights are. There is not one single definition, but common to all approaches is the conviction that human rights are fundamental for us to live in dignity as human beings. Human rights guarantee the equality of all people, integrity of the person, privacy, personal freedom, and fulfillment of basic existential and social needs. They are the rights and freedoms that belong to each and every person, because we are all human beings. So, we are all entitled to these rights and freedoms, whatever our nationality, place of residence, sex, skin color, religion, and language. Would you be able to recognize how human rights relate to your daily life? Human rights issues surround us everywhere in our lives. Whether you speak your mind, freely choose your partner, or gather with friends in public. Human rights seek to ensure that we are treated fairly and equally at work, at school, and at home. Can you name some of them? Think about it for 30 seconds. Now, think about some everyday situations like going to school, receiving treatment in a hospital, sharing personal information with your employers, traveling, or even dancing and painting a picture. Some human rights are the right to privacy, the right to freedom of expression, the right to education, the rights to freedom of movement, the right to health. Can you think of other rights that are related to your life, whether at home and in school, when interacting with others in your workplace, or when sharing your thoughts online? If one of these rights is taken away, how does this affect your other rights? Write your reflection on your notebook. Here are more examples on human rights. While the principles underlying them can be traced further back in time, it was only after the atrocities of World War II that the protection of human rights emerged prominently as an urgent challenge that states committed to address at the international level. In 1948, the first international document on human rights was adopted, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, also known as UDHR. The first article states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was one of the first steps in giving individuals a tool in the fight against oppression, impunity, and attacks on human dignity. The UDHR includes, amongst many others, the right to life, the right to education, the right to freedom of expression, the right to adequate standard of living, including housing, food, clothing, and medical care, the right to Social Security, the prohibition of torture, the right to work, and the right to liberty. You have seen that human rights concern all aspects of our lives. Let's now consider how they are upheld across the world. Following the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, states have adopted additional international treaties and agreements that further elaborate the type of human rights to be protected, as well as their scope. Human rights include civil and political issues, economic, social, and cultural issues, racial discrimination, migrant workers, people with disabilities, children, women. Why are these documents important? Many of these documents create binding obligations for all states who have accepted them. The compliance with these obligations is monitored by international protection mechanisms. For example, the United Nations treaty bodies or regional human rights courts in the Americas, Africa, and Europe. These documents also represent an important point of reference for holding states accountable when it comes to their own human rights records. Do you know where some of the best established regional human rights systems are? Think about it for some seconds. Some of the best systems have been established by the Council of Europe, with the European Court of Human Rights, by the Organization of American States, with the Inter-American Commission and Court of Human Rights, and the African Union, with the African Court on Human and People's Rights. So what's the state's role in human rights then? Under these treaties, it is the states that are obliged to respect, protect, and fulfill these rights for all persons on their territory. Respecting our rights means to refrain from undue interference, for instance, police violence, torture, arbitrary executions or arrests. Protecting our rights means to take measures to prevent abuse of our rights by others, for instance, against domestic violence, against environmental pollution by big companies. Fulfilling our rights means to create the legal and institutional framework so our rights can be guaranteed. For instance, build schools and hospitals, adopt laws prohibiting crimes against life and property. However, not all states uphold their human rights obligations in the way they should, and our rights are not always equally guaranteed or respected in different parts of the world. Human rights are violated every day, in all corners of the world, and sometimes on a horrendous scale. But they are also protected by laws, which means that we can claim our rights before national courts, other state authorities, and even international bodies. Everyone can defend human rights. Human rights belong to everyone, and everyone can play a role in defending and promoting them. Too often, states do not guarantee our rights, even though they should. In order to uphold them, we need to claim them. And this is where you and everyone else can play an important role. Whether it is getting active in your community, raising awareness for a cause in the broader public, or urging states to live up to their human rights obligations. Would you be able to convey your message and discuss human rights with others? One of the first steps in promoting and claiming human rights is to talk about them. When discussing human rights issues with friends, colleagues, or other people, you might have felt that there are some misconceptions that you don't agree with, but don't know how to respond to. Let's explore some human rights principles, finding out how to react to statements you might have heard in previous discussions. Now, take 20 seconds to think about your argument with each statement. For instance, if I asked you who has human rights, would you answer that everybody has human rights from birth onwards, or that it depends?
I would argue that it depends, as most individuals in the Northern Hemisphere have human rights, while many people in the Southern Hemisphere don't.
For me, everybody has human rights from birth onwards.
The correct answer is that we are all born with human rights. They cannot be given, bought, earned, or inherited. This is one of the key characteristics, the principle of inheritance. However, despite everyone being entitled to them, there are many people whose human rights are not respected or protected. When states do not live up to their obligations, human rights defenders take action to claim back their rights and those of others. My following question is, are human rights universal, and do they apply to everybody?
No, I think that they are just a Western concept and represent a tool for the West to force their values upon other states.
Well, it depends on each state to decide which human rights the people on its territory should have.
Yes, all human beings everywhere in the world are entitled to the fulfillment and guarantee of all human rights.
The correct answer is that all human beings have human rights. It is the duty of all states to promote and protect them. This is one of their key characteristics, the principle of universality. The concept of human rights is based on human values that can be traced in various cultures, philosophies, and religions around the globe. Despite some differences in traditions and values, all human beings share common human needs, which are addressed by human rights. One more question. Do you think that when an individual commits a crime and is sentenced to imprisonment, they lose their human rights, especially the right to liberty?
I think that it's wrong, because even if an individual commits the most serious crimes like murder or rape, they should not be stripped of their rights. However, they will be restricted in their enjoyment of them as a consequence of their crime, so some human rights might, under certain circumstances, be limited, but they still have them.
I don't agree. I think that if an individual commits a crime, they lose their right. You cannot expect to have human rights if you abuse the rights of others.
Well, millions of people worldwide lose their human rights every day, even without having committed a crime.
What do you think? Who do you agree with? Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is that human rights cannot be taken away or renounced. No one has the right to deprive another person of their rights. or to give up their rights for any reason. This is one of the key characteristics of human rights, the principle of inalienability. Most of them can, however, be limited if certain conditions are met.
What are those certain conditions?
The certain conditions are those provided by law, meaning that any restriction must be incorporated into domestic legislation, formulated with sufficient precision to enable an individual to regulate their conduct accordingly. Legitimate aim, as the measure needs to pursue a legitimate aim of protecting specified public interests, national security, public order, public health, or morals, or the rights or reputations of others. Necessary, meaning that the limitation it is the least restrictive measure to achieve the legitimate aim. And proportionate, meaning that the measure is not more harmful than the harm it is designed to protect against. And to conclude this discussion, do you think that some human rights are more important than others?
I think that all human rights have to be seen as a whole. If one right is not guaranteed, a multitude of other rights might be affected as well. For example, if the right to housing is violated and a person must sleep in the streets, the right to health, to recreation, and ultimately to work are also at stake.
I believe that human rights which protect civil and political liberties like the right to life, the right to freedom of expression, the right to fair trial, or the prohibition of torture are most important, as they guarantee that states refrain from interfering in the personal and political decisions of individuals.
I think human rights which guarantee the fulfillment of basic needs are more important. Only when, for example, the right to food, the right to water, and the right to work are protected can individuals start to consider making use of their right to freedom of expression or the right to strike.
One of the previous answers proves true again. All human beings are entitled to all human rights. The guarantee of one human right facilitates the guarantee of the others. Likewise, the deprivation of one human right often adversely affects the others. States should not be able to pick and choose which categories of human rights are guaranteed. This is one of their key characteristics: the principle of indivisibility, interdependence, and interrelatedness. Let's now talk more about the principles of human rights. Human rights are equal and non-discriminatory, interdependent, interrelated, and indivisible, universal, inherent, and inalienable. It's important to remember that these principles are their key qualities. They can also be seen as aspirations and ultimate objectives of the human rights system. Equal and non-discriminatory means that all human beings are born equal in dignity and rights. We are all equally entitled to our human rights without discrimination, whatever our nationality, place of residence, sex, national, ethnic, or social origin, skin color, religion, gender identity, or any other status. Interdependent, interrelated, and indivisible means that all human beings are entitled to all human rights. The guarantee of one human right facilitates the guarantee of the others, and the degradation of one human right often adversely affects the others. How to take action? Let's explore some ideas on how you can promote human rights in your community. When you are taking action, don't forget to research what human rights organizations around you are already working on. It might be more effective to join forces with others instead of duplicating or unintentionally undermining the efforts of existing initiatives. In all cases, make sure that your actions do not harm others in your specific context. Some of the key strengths and skills that you could use to promote human rights in your community are researching facts, engaging in discussions, taking a stance in your daily life, and educating others. The first strength is to research the facts and share your findings. Stay informed and up to date on human rights issues, and in general, follow the local, national, and international news. Pick a variety of sources to ensure you have a diversity of views and opinions. If you plan to take action for others, listen to them and find out how you can really help them. Take further trainings, workshops, or courses on human rights issues, online and/or offline. Invite friends or colleagues to take the courses with you. Discuss what you learned and why it matters. Produce a community newsletter, offering a human rights perspective on daily issues. The second most important thing you can do is starting a dialogue and engaging a discussion about human rights. Discuss current human rights challenges and issues with your friends, colleagues, and especially with people who have different opinions to yours. Challenge friends and family members who tell racist or discriminatory jokes at home. It can be difficult to speak up to the people closest to you, but nevertheless, you can explain to them how their comments make you feel and what impact they can have on others. Taking a stance in everyday life is another key thing that you can do. When you witness a verbal racist attack in the streets or in public transport, don't remain silent or passive. Try to provide comfort to the person being targeted by involving them in a dialogue. Try to ignore the attacker, yet take steps to ensure your physical safety when you find yourself in such a confronting situation. In fact, even if you ignore the attacker, you could still be putting yourself in harm by going into this dangerous situation to comfort a victim. However, your courage will be an inspiration for others to do the same. Speak up when you see that someone is not treated with dignity, whether it is for a classmate who is being bullied, a colleague that is being harassed, or a friend that is being discriminated because of who they are. Showing solidarity and courage when it is needed can make a whole lot of difference. Last but not least, you can educate others and be empathetic by supporting people in your neighborhood who are living at the edges of society. Homeless persons, asylum seekers, refugees, or people with little or no income. Visiting a local homeless or asylum center, for example, can help to break down barriers or prejudices and be a source of comfort to those being visited. This is also a valuable learning experience for yourself. Those who visit these places have lots to learn, and these experiences are often a two-way learning opportunity. Supporting kids with learning difficulties or young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, helping them to catch up with their peers and benefit as fully as possible from the education system. Helping others to thrive can be an incredibly rewarding experience. Tutor recent immigrants and refugees in your city. Help them with basic tasks such as using public transport, filling out forms to access services, finding their way through the bureaucratic maze, or prepare immigrants for citizenship examinations. So far, you have explored how the concept of human rights relates to your everyday life. You have also encountered some ideas on how to take action for human rights in your community. Take pen and paper and reflect on the following. Think for 10 seconds about what you have learned so far. Which human rights issues are of most concern to you and in your context? Congratulations! You have completed Module 1. Please continue to Module 2 to learn more about how to speak up for human rights. In this module, we explored the fundamental principles of human rights: universality, inalienability, and the principle of indivisibility, interdependence, and interrelatedness. We have seen that human rights are universal in the sense that all human beings, everywhere in the world, have them. While the significance of national, regional, and cultural particularities must be kept in mind, it is the duty of all states to promote and protect all human rights, primarily in their territory and for people under their jurisdiction. They are also inherent, as we are born with them. Human rights cannot be given, bought, earned, or inherited. Finally, they are inalienable, because they cannot be taken away, renounced, or exchanged. No one has the right to deprive another person of their rights, or to give up their rights for any reason.